Thank you, Dr. Doering, and thank you, colleagues, for this great opportunity. I want to congratulate all the speakers before. I've learned so much from your insights, and I hope that this discussion will continue as we build our knowledge and understanding of science and why we do science. Also want to acknowledge Fred Dubey's comment on the purpose of science and why and the hows of science. I will touch base on some of these issues in my talk today. While preparing for this talk, I was reflecting on my own journey as a physician and a scientist, and I would also share with you two insights about two interesting projects I lead in neurology and neuroscience in particular. So let me start with the topic. The topic I was given by our chairs today was about engineering ethics to engineer science, putting the cart before the horse. Well, that's full of jargons and full of words, but I must say this was quite an interesting topic, and I took by the horn. And in all humility, I hope that I would be able to do justice to our chairs. Is such an interesting topic, but I would seek your indulgence as I do that. As a physician scientist who have had an enormous privilege and honor to do science as a student, a teacher, and an advocate, I've constantly asked myself, what is science? Why should we pursue science? How should we do science? And why is science needed in times that we live in? Why trust is key to science? And some of these questions really come and hinge around the topic that I was given today. And today, I hope that I would be able to share with you my understanding of various aspects of foundation of science. And I will argue with you to build upon the exploration of science and scholarship around applying the highest standards of ethics to frame and investigate the questions in science, explore it together, and most importantly, how important is trust in building science, in how and why of science that Fred Dubey has rightly invoked. Allow me to share two experiences from my own journey. 4 or 5 years ago, a patient presented to a clinic, a neurology clinic, with what we call cryptogenic stroke. So these are the strokes. Stroke is, it's a disease that is caused by interruption of blood flow to the brain, which causes severe impact, and many parts and the tissues in the brain starts dying. This is called an ischemic stroke. 4 or 5 years ago, I came to understand a patient who experienced what we call cryptogenic stroke. These are the strokes without defined cause or mechanism. These are 30 to 40% of all stroke patients that come to our clinic. Now, that curiosity that was sparked in my heart, that we are, as a clinician, I'm unable to give a name to a patient who's coming to this with this particular condition. What can I do to address this clinical challenge? Now, that scientific curiosity was important. Now, very much part of this process was the humility as a clinician that I do not know the process. I do not know the right mechanism that is causing this patient. So I sat with the patient for several hours, and we debated about the experiences of that patient. And that was the spark of that curiosity that led me to investigate the clots that are retrieved from acute ischemic stroke patients on a longitudinal basis. So we then did a large study on 110, 115 patients from the clots that were retrieved from these patients, and we investigated them under microscope and doing further brain imaging to understand where these clots are coming from. What was interesting from our work that we understood that a portion of these patients who are previously called cryptogenic stroke may have a cardioembolic origin. That means these are the clots coming from the heart, lodging into the brain, blocking an artery into the brain, and causing the stroke that I discussed before. So here I share this experience. Why? Because that curiosity of thought, a societal challenge that inflicts on these patients, was at the genesis of this curiosity for investigation. Today, with that idea, when we shared this work overseas and around the world, it became quite an investigation. Now the brain clots are being routinely examined in clinical practice, And we have just launched one of the largest collection in Australia 2-3 years ago. And now we have expanded that collection in Liverpool in UK. So to show that translation that started a humble beginning in Australia has now gone on to make, and that the critical element of collaboration is so important. I want to share with you a second insight. Several years ago, after doing a neurology clinic late in the night, I was traveling back at 12 midnight back home. And my car broke down, so I took a public transport. At the juncture of the public transport, there was a patient, a person who was standing at the Opal. In Australia, we got these Opal cards where you have to tap on and tap off while entering the transport. The person was repeatedly tapping on and tapping off on that entry port at the station. And the people around the person, old gentleman, was laughing at him. As a neurologist, my curiosity kicked in. And I said, hold on. I went to the patient, to the person, and I said, can I help you? And he said, yes, I am unable, I have to go to Liverpool. I said, interesting. The place where you are in is Liverpool. The patient had an early onset of dementia, but not diagnosed. That gave me an understanding how much little community knows about these conditions. And I started a program called Neurology Talkies, where I ended my many weekends talking at the libraries, communicating with patients and community about the burden these neurological diseases causes and many of the undiagnosed patients in the community. These two experiences has very much driven the curiosity of me as a scientist and a clinician. Now, let me expand on these experiences and give some insights on the topic that I was given. You all know that UNESCO defines science as the greatest collective endeavor. And I think that is truly right. From CRISPR technology to robotics to applications of artificial intelligence to solving some of the pressing challenges in global health and neuroscience, science has evolved with collaboration. A little experiment done on a mice in a part of Europe, then traveling all the way to Harvard and MIT, coming back to Europe. That is the level of collaboration, that incremental knowledge that we have built over time has created that repository of science for us to share. In this context, the exponential growth in science has also raised questions around ethics, on public understanding and engagement with science, as well as citizen participation to optimize the fruits of science. Our advances for the greater good, which some of you have invoked for the greater good of humanity. Now, why that brings us to the question that the trust, the quality of science and excellence is so important and has never been as poignant as it is today. I hope it does for you as much as it does for me. And I give you some statistics from US, which is quite starking and something calls for our reflection. The 2019 Pew survey from the United States reflects that 35% of Americans trust scientists a lot. That leaves us with 65% of the population who doesn't trust scientists. Now that is quite a telling understanding of how this figure tells about the science and our citizen participation. Now, during the pandemic in 2020, this number went all the way to 40%. And the latest survey has indicated that it has fallen below the pre-pandemic level. So it has gone beyond the time that we started on. So 2019 and above, before, the levels have gone down. What is that is causing this is constant fluctuation in the people's perception of science and the trust in scientists. Now, I come to the question which I started before. Science is complex. We observe, we outline, and then evaluate our hypothesis. As our knowledge is developed and understood, we revisit our hypothesis. And at the core of it is the self-correction of how we do science, how we understand the science, what is at the heart of science. However, recent times, there is a growing realization that the fruit of science is to be understood, participated in, and created in tandem with the public. The public participation is an important, not just one of those clauses that you have to do in part of your research project, but it's critical to how do we conceive science altogether. We have seen during the coronavirus pandemic, simple public health messages or advice that were conveyed to the community hasn't been taken as much as we would like to. The public health advice has changed dramatically over time, and its intake within the community has been suboptimal. And rightly so. That gives us an important question. How do we receive and interpret science needs to be understood not from the perspective of scientists, but from the perspective of the citizens that we are doing science for. Are they involved in the process of doing science? At the very genesis of science, when we start conceiving our projects, to the part where we are delivering that back to our community. In this tangent, it is imperative to reflect that simply asserting that the common public should have faith in scientists is not good enough. We got to do better. We got to do more to really communicate that message to the community. Trust just in real world, as much as in our community, has to be gained, not to be assumed. The trust in science, for that to happen, we need, as a scientist, we need to be advocates for the science that we are doing in our community. Sadly, neither science nor the scientists have consistently fostered nor earned this trust. This is the outcome of scientific enterprise advancement in some ways, which in our previous discussion with Professor Doering, we call it the commercialization of science, which unfortunately has dented the image of science altogether. Now, I ask you, what is science if we cannot protect the vulnerable communities of the world? What is science when the innovations that are coming out of science is only serving a particular part of the community, and the other part of the community cannot afford it? You take for CRISPR technology for that example. So the benefits of science should be equitable to the community that we would like to serve. It is also important to de-jargonize science communication. I think we use many cryptic words which might not be understood by a community. Now, before we do science, shouldn't we ask ourselves, what is the kind of infrastructure that we need for science? We may not have the right answers for these questions, but some of the answers that has been given in this session today about open science, collaborative science, collaboration with international scientists may be the key to understand and de-jargonize science. Let's be honest. Unknowingly, we have contributed to the condition of mistrust that we have at this moment. The scientific institutions or the temples of academic learning, which are intended to promote curiosity and advantages for the science for the greater good, have in some ways fallen from the grace that they were held before. I ask all of us and our broader scientific community to ask fundamental questions on the purpose of science. Put the cart before the horse, to reflect on our journey and make amends for the future. Why some quarters of our community resent, why the vulnerable communities resent the messaging from our public health experts. I'll give you an example from the HeLa cell line. Remember the great cell line that were drawn from a Black patient and never acknowledged. Remember the Tuskegee study that was done on the Black men with untreated syphilis, and the cruelty during the Holocaust. Our history is ripe with ethical violations and transgressions. The historical precedence compels us to reflect on where and how we as the community and science and disciplines has failed in some moments of our time. However, the fact is that we are here today as scientists. We go back to our original definition of science being a collective endeavor, fostering collaboration across the disciplines, in between scientists, in between science and community, and most importantly, putting the cart before the horse is asking the right ethical questions that is important. As a community, we have a task cut out for us to do, propagate, advocate, and celebrate science. Wait, not just science, but ethics in doing science and engaging with the society. This will ensure that we reinvigorate our appetite for science and do what we do best, but do also that in a particular ethical way, so as to solve the mysteries of nature and to improve the quality of lives. Lastly, I leave you with this, that the cart and the horse needs collaboration. It's a collaboration, a fertile ground for scientists and society to collaborate, in true spirit of science and for the greater good of humanity. One of my greatest inspiration, a Nobel laureate, Santiago Ramón y Cajal, a Spanish Nobel laureate, he used to say that nothing inspires more reverence and awe in me than the old man who knows how to change his mind. As scientists, we need to reflect and keep changing our mind for the greater good of humanity. Thank you so much for indulging me.